All right, thank you so much. First of all, thank you for getting up early and tuning in. I really love this series. I've learned a lot. So you and Sam are just doing an awesome job with this. So props to you guys. So let's just get going. I'll set a timer so I know we don't go over long. All right, the topic I wanted to talk about was unlocking your story to engage your world. I don't have to say this, there's a lot going on out there. And for me, it's been really interesting wrestling with a lot of the ideas. The analogy I had for this was when a metaphorical plane is going down, you're instructed to put your mask on, your oxygen mask, although wear your other masks too. And take care of those around you after you've got your mask on. So for me, story is a bit like that. This is a quote from an artist friend of mine who did a haiku. COVID came to us magnifying our practiced, unexamined lives. And there was a pause with COVID, with quarantine. And what was interesting was there was this worldwide phenomenon, almost this primal urge to take care of ourselves as our species and to do radical things that would kind of have some ripple effects. And one thing in the pause that I noticed is that there was this underlying message that human life really mattered more than economy and more than a lot of things that we held dear. And then in the wake of that, we realized with George Floyd and just the series of events with Black Lives Matter, how that our systems might not be working the way we thought they were, and life maybe wasn't as valuable as we thought it had. So all of these things in my head, my reaction to it, that cognitive dissonance, is why I wanted to delve into this topic. I want to show you this picture of Steve Dixon. Now, Steve is a designer in San Diego, but he was also, when I was a freshman in college, he gave me the best design advice ever. And that was, I had a new project. I was getting ready to get it critiqued. And I was showing it to him. And I was like, I stayed up late. I wish I had more time. I'm not sure if I picked the right type. And I was just, not really talking well of it. And he stopped me right there and he's like, whoa, Charles, if you don't respect your work, why should anybody else? I've shared this story when I've talked with students before, and it's just really stuck with me. And what I want to do is extrapolate that a little bit. Is not just your work, the things that you offer the world, but your thoughts and your ideas and where you came from, your story. When you take time to know your story, that's an act of self-respect. And if you can create empathy by understanding your own story, empathy for yourself, you'll be able to build that empathy for others. Also, when we share our stories and we're authentic, we're talking about our trials and our failures, how we overcame things. In that exchange, we learn about each other and we share our humanity. Stories also, though, if they're true, and as you discover things, they can bring conflict. But wrestling with that both personally and socially can lead to resolution and possibility. And I think if you're listening well enough, better design solutions. I really like this quote because this frames this up for me. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. This really sunk with me, especially in understanding history in the United States. We're at this period right now of looking backwards and understanding. And this is very topical, but with that information, with what we're learning, with the stories we're listening to now, we have to live forwards in a new way. All right, I'm going to tell you my story a little bit in little pieces quickly. This is a story of Jim and Lily. Jim on the left is my dad. He was born in Granger, Washington, and he was always a bit of a rascal. He was very positive, an extreme people person, very much an extrovert. And in high school, he did a crazy thing, which he joined this thing called the International Foreign Youth Exchange. And that took him to to a country called Ceylon that is now called Sri Lanka. So he was a farm boy from rural America, and this was crazy for him. It opened his eyes to new foods, new cultures, new ideas, new religions. It really informed him. So he came back, changed. He was appointed to go to West Point, and he wrestled with that idea, and he just decided he was going to just do his own thing against a lot of advice, and that was to join the Peace Corps. Which was an organization that started in 1961 to sort of exchange ideas, farming in this case, practices, and learn more about other cultures. So he went to a place called Tonacatepeque in El Salvador, and it was during his time there, during a service, that he met Lily, which is my mom. So I'll talk a bit about Lily for a second, and she was a dancer. She was also, her father was very ambitious and wanted her to get ahead, and so she was very independent. They were both really stubborn and wildly optimistic people. She didn't like the rules of the Peace Corps, which was when you were married, which they got married, you weren't supposed to do that. And you especially weren't supposed to have kids. And she was like, meh, I want to have kids. And so I came along. So because of that, they moved back to Washington State. And like I said, this is rural Washington. And I was born on the Yakima Nation on tribal land, only because this was the closest hospital to where I grew up. In the background this is a picture of the valley, and this mountain is called Mount Adams if you're not on the reservation, but Pato is its native name, and I'm going to be circling back to why that's important. I think that's important anyway, but and Washington State's beautiful, so there you go. All right, things were going to be great, right? I had these really interesting parents, wildly passionate, engaged, wanting to change the world, do new things, but their story didn't work out. They were a bit on some things like oil and water. And so sadly, when I was 5, they got divorced, and I was raised by my dad. Unfortunately, because of the way that all worked out, the Spanish left me. My first words were in Spanish. My mom spoke to me in Spanish from 0 to 5. So somewhere in me, this language is locked up. And I'll talk a little bit more about how discovering my story played out later as far as my relationship to language. But so I would have this duality. If I'm little and tiny, and people knew me when I was born, I'm Carlos. But when we moved back away from Washington State to Chicago, Illinois. And the way I grew up, Carpenter, it was always Charles. And that was me deciding to do that. So growing up was this weird mystery box of just not connected to my mom and my culture and that, and sort of led to a journey of discovery. I wanted to know more about who I was and how I was raised, and thankfully there's technology that lets you do that. In my case, I took the 23andMe test, and I learned a lot about my family. One particular thing about this is that I come from a line of my mother's mom, her grandmother, is a native people, which is an indigenous people group in El Salvador. And I learned, unfortunately, that these people during the Spanish conquest were had land taken away, and they were not paid, a bit like how we come to understand slavery. And in 1932, they revolted, this indigenous people group. And in a couple of days, there was a brutal murder of 30,000 of these men, women, in this incident. My great-grandmother is a survivor of this. And even though after that, the people no longer dressed in their native clothing. They assimilated. They stopped speaking the Nahuatl language, although I'm told that she still or had spoken it. And in my family, some people carry on this language a little bit. And I'm dying to go visit this because I want to know more about it. But what was remarkable to me about this story is that there's an aspect of myself that would not be here if that had happened. Going way back even further, her descendants are part of this haplogroup, which is called the A2, that 16,000 years ago went from Siberia over the land peninsula into Central America. And then during the Ice Age, the journeyway closed. And so for thousands of years, North America, Central America, South America, the Americas, as we're calling them, was cut off from the rest of the world. All right, I'm going to show a brief clip here about how I kind of started to put all these pieces together. I used a model called Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. If you had an English class, I'm sure you've heard of this. If you Googled online, but this is the basis for not just a lot of our popular movies like Star Wars or Harry Potter, but also like ancient myths going from the Bhagavad Gita to the Old and New Testament to Greek, Roman, North mythology. So I'm going to just play this real quick because it summarizes really well. Whoops, sorry about that. Well, that's not going well. Here we go.
Hey, Charles, there is no sound. I thought there was sound.
There's no sound. That's not good. All right, well, then we'll change. So, okay.
Yeah.
What? All right, so on my link, when you get this, you can watch that little bit about the hero's journey. I'll summarize the 2 minutes into, basically it's a model for telling your story, where you have a quest, then you leave and cross a threshold, you wrestle or overcome a challenge, and then through that challenge you have transformation. So I apologize that didn't work out. You can check that out on your own later. It worked in testing, but you know, that's what happens. We move on. All right, hold on. All right, another map for telling your story for me is the Enneagram, and this it's gotten a lot of buzz right now. You'll hear people talk about this. What it is it's just a way to understand who you are and how you operate in the world. I'm learning about this. This is not something I've at all mastered, but I happen to be Enneagram type 9, which is the peacemaker. What this does is when you're coming up with your story, it's good to sort of have a compass or a true north. And tools like this sort of help you find out what's valuable and purposeful to you. If Another tool is the Ikigai, which is the series of questions that Toyota Motor Works has used, but it's also an ancient Japanese method of understanding things in your life that make it worthwhile. My point with this is that there's a lot of different things. You can journal, you can meditate, you can talk to people, but find out the things that you value the most, because this will help you informing your story and understanding what your personal goals and quests are. All right, another point I want to have is once you've developed your story, you want to be able to tell it. And then and hopefully this happens organically. For me, this is just in conversation. And I just now have done some of the groundwork to talk a little bit about how I've struggled with language and identity, just finding that quest of knowing who I was, and eventually reconnecting with my mom, and then also starting Spanish again, and discovering the language and my heritage. And these tools would inform future work, future trips, and just my trajectory for the rest of my life. A couple ground rules, though, that I wanted to bring up is when you're telling your story or hearing someone else's story, treat that as sacred ground and don't share a story without asking someone's permission. Honor and respect that story. Also, a commitment to not judging and just letting a story be what it is. Also, for the storyteller to be as vulnerable and honest and authentic as possible. People will connect with it. We have, as humans, we're really good. We have good BS meters. We know when someone's truthful or not. And then also just being present with a person. For me, it's putting my phone down and just being there, and not feeling like I need to interject in the story or relate to the story, but just listening. And then after I've heard it, ask questions. Last two things is just let a person be where they are. Maybe for me, it's easy to just be like, oh, well, they don't have all the facts, or they don't understand like this, that, or the other thing. And just let them be where they're at. In time, as a relationship develops, you get to discover more of why are they telling you the things they're telling you. And the last point, Rick's brought this up before, Rick Griffith, which I think is a good personal practice. It's so simple, but integrity, being who you are, honoring your promises, keeping your word. People will respect your story a lot more if they feel like you're just having that integrity part. And that's also good for both personal and professional development. I don't ever want to pretend that my story is any more important than anyone else's. So another thing I like to carry with me is just this humility and just this chance to connect with people personally by having them share where they're coming from. All right, so I talked a little bit about my story, and here's where it's leading me. I've been spending a lot of time in Honduras. I was invited to be part of a school that's doing work there with kids who either their parents can't take care of them or nobody wants them, and they're learning skills. And I'm involved by coming alongside. It's an organization that was started in Honduras and is for Hondurans. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. But one thing about being in Central America, because it's adjacent to El Salvador, is people come up to me and they start speaking in Spanish, and I'm like, "Lo siento," I'm learning, but people look like me, and they, there's a weird kind of home feeling that when I'm down there. I've been able to do some work for a coffee farmer in El Salvador, Carlos Pola. I'm actually drinking his coffee right now. And just to have that connection, and we're planning on doing a trip where I can go to the farm and meet him. And I'm really looking forward to that because I kind of want to see some of these ancient Mayan ruins from, like I mentioned before, and just reconnect a lot of dots. I think the thing with a good story too is it calls you to action. All right, another thing I want to do for me is I process a lot by being tangible and visiting things. I was really struck with the recent Black Lives Matter work of the organization of the Equal Justice Initiative, and also their work on education in looking at the past to move into the future. And one of the things they have there that I'm personally taking a trip to in the spring, and if anyone's interested in this, let me know, because I'd love to go with a group of people that process this. But that's to go to the Center of Peace, or the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, that lists 4,000+ lynchings in America, and each of these grave markers or memorials, the names and the stories of the people are written there. So since I've been able to connect with my story, I'm open to hearing these other stories. And this is hard stuff. This is brutal. This is our history as Americans. It's just rough. But I want to encounter it, and I want to be uncomfortable with it, and I want to just process this. So the ability to have a story makes you want to go to do these things. All right. I'm going to actually wrap up, but I wanted to show you this bit about AIGA. There's, you can check out more about the school and what they're doing to break the cycle of poverty. And I have some resources here. That went really fast, so thanks for that time. And I am basically done. There's some links and resources that you can check out on the presentation. You can watch that video if you want. So thank you. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
So thank you so much, Charles. The first things I'm reading in the chat is from Ellie saying, Charles, Steph, and I would be interested in the Alabama trip.
Awesome. I'm very serious about that. I want to do it in the spring, obviously when COVID is not a thing, but just email me your names, and I'm going to be organizing the trip. I'm going to talk to the Equal Justice Initiative about how we go about getting the most out of that, and also just processing. Yeah, so great. That's exciting. Yeah.
I mean, if you want, we can include a link and then your contact in the recap email you guys are gonna get. So if you are interested to go to Alabama with Charles, and like contact him directly for details. And going back, so there is the Q&A icon. You can click on that if you have questions for Charles. Let me know, write them down, and I'm gonna go over them. So we have one question from Cassie. She said, hi Charles, do you have any tips for overcoming feeling of shame or embarrassment so we can share our story?
Yeah, so shame, shame is soulless, right? And it keeps a lot of us from being brave to have the conversations that we need to have, or just, so with shame, my recommendation is find some safe people, and which I've done in my life, that you can kind of unpack, and that will hold that space for you to kind of just deal with it. In some regards, depending on where the shame's coming from, I really recommend counseling. I've done some of that work myself. But yeah, first of all, you're not alone. Shame keeps a lot of us from speaking up, using our voice, kind of doing the things we really want to do. So it's a really important aspect to address. I wish there was a quick tip, but I think the most important thing is find some safe people to unpack that with, and process that with, and then seek counseling if it's if you need to.
Thank you. One more question from Liv. What is an aspect of your story that has really made you stop and rethink how you approach the world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, I had lived with a certain uncertainty about who I was. And whenever I talked to my dad or my mom about the past, it was always, that's the past and ignore it. But for me, I needed to know. And so I think I'm never afraid of a hard question. And I just, if something comes up that is hard for me to look at, I want to dive in and really look at that. That's a signal for me to really address that topic. And that can show up in so many ways and so many different things. But I think bravery and being brave enough to have hard conversations and to rethink everything, because I operated with one certain assumption of who I was, and only later in life did that radically change and start to change my perception and how I thought about even reality itself personally. So it's kind of a not direct way to answer that, but that's the best I got for right now.
One more from James. Thank you, Charles, for your presentation. Are there any tips on how to make the most of the 23andMe profile data?
Yeah, okay. I love this stuff. What it's gonna do is give you a lot of things to look at, but it'll also, for those who are also taking it, will allow you to connect with your DNA relatives. This is huge because I didn't learn anything about my great-great-grandmother on my mom's side, that story, until I connected with my cousin Denise in Canada. And she knew all about it. And we spent hours on the phone, like talking about family history and the fact that she was indigenous and how that showed up in food. And it was like all this new information. So connect with your DNA relatives, send them messages. If they're on there, they're curious too. So I haven't had any no's, and it's fascinating the stuff you learn. The only other tip about this though is you're opening the skeleton's closet on a few things. I learned about there's some aspects of especially on my mom's side, the Romeros, that reads a bit like a telenovela with like a grandmother's mistress, that mistress falling in love with the son, then it ended in murder. I mean, there's like really sensitive things that, you just have to be careful with, because science doesn't lie. And the gene, anyway, there's things you can discover. So I think treating it as fun and discovery, but also with some sensitivity as well.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes you open like a Pandora box,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's great, sometimes you don't know what to expect. So I think everyone has to be conscious and
yeah, and there's some times where you want to find out more and you can't, and you just have to respect that. People have just made a decision to not address that, and just like, okay, so.
Do you think it still works when you are the only one that does the 23andMe and no one of your family or relatives have done it before?
I think there's a little bit of doubt when it's just you. That was my case. I'm like, oh, look, I've got all this information on my dad's side of English and Irish and French and German. And then there's I think a 12% component from sub-Saharan Africa. And I was like, what's the story there? So when you start to connect with your DNA relatives and you start to have conversations, then it sort of illuminates and becomes more real. But at first it's just a lot of data points, and you're like, I think the biggest thing about it though, personally, is that you realize that we're a hodgepodge of humanity from all sorts of different people groups and ethnicities, but we're all part of humanity, and that's what I love about it. And there's other things like Ancestry.com. There's other tests out there, but it's cool that we have this technology now to learn our stories.
And I think at the end of the day, it's important to know who we are, and also all this COVID period I mean, he affect literally anyone, and it's that kind of moment where like we step back and you're like questioning your lives, like who I am, like what do I want to do, where I want to go. And like I saw many people taking their courage and like changing path, and I think finding ourselves and like understanding who we really are, it really helps to have some like strong ground under our feet. One more question from Helen. She said, what was the name of the Japanese personality profile that you mentioned, the Enneagram slide?
Yeah, I have a link. You can check out more about that, but it's literally pronounced ikigai, like an icky guy, but that's how you pronounce it. And there's two constructs of this. There's a Western version of it, where you sort of look at what you're good at, what the world needs, what you love, and then where all those things intersect is your ikigai. That's a Western ideal of it. The Japanese one is a little bit more contemplative about not necessarily finding that sweet spot of money, but what are the things that give your life meaning and make it worth living, and that's what's interesting about that model.
So Helen, just this is for you. When you get the presentation, like later tonight or tomorrow, you can just check the link and you can see details. So related to that, like, can you just go online and like do the test?
It's not even so for Enneagram, the Enneagram Institute is a test, and that's worth the $10 for that one. For Ikigai, it's just something you could just write circles and do worksheets on your own. You can download them. Anything of these things, is people are using them to discover things, and there's you can subscribe to things and pay for things, but you could figure it out on your own by just going to the website and just following some steps. If you Google it, yeah, you can just use it. And for me, it's just a tool to help kind of find that purpose. You can go a lot more in depth on it. And there's Ikigai masters and all that kind of stuff. And there's Enneagram coaches. And so you can go as far down that rabbit trail as you want. So.
Okay, perfect. If anyone has more questions, write them down. I think in general, what I would like to know from you is like, so after looking like at your presentation, are you suggesting for like everyone to go back, stop, and find our own story moving forward?
Yeah, so my takeaway is, in order to deal with the world around you, know your backstory. And some people do already. For me, I had to do a little bit of work at that. But talk to family, know where you came from, what made your values, what made your assumptions. I think this is really important work to do now, because we're operating from a lot of systems. There's aspects of colonization and white supremacy, and those are heady, big things to unpack. And I know there's books and things, and there's a lot of important information to do that. But this is sort of a starter of like, know who you are and where you came from and what informed why you are the way you are and why you think the way you think. And that might be challenging and hard, but I think it's important work. So not only for that, but also for you to wake up in the morning and know why you exist and what you want to do. These things will inform that. So yeah, I'm encouraging people to know their stories so that they'll better be able to listen to other people's stories. That's what I hope is the takeaway.
Thank you for that. Thank you. That's a great advice. We have one more question from Helen. She said, what are your daily habits to keep in touch with your story?
I follow through with some conversations. I just, like yesterday, learned about some new things with an uncle of mine. So keeping the conversation going, talking to my cousin, and then also for me, I'm planning trips. I'm visiting El Salvador, and I want to do an origin trip. I'm going back to Honduras, and by the way, real quick on Honduras, that's where my anything for today is going towards, and you can summarize that later. But I do trips down there to encounter that culture and to help. It turns out the United States and Honduras have a history I had no idea, where we helped kind of prop up who they have as their government leaders, and it's not the best situation for the people. It's also a horrible country for women. So it's one of the highest femicide rates. So anyway, it's on my heart to be part of this because I left a bit of my heart there, and I'm involved. So that work gives me some meaning and purpose and reconnecting with Central America. So.
I mean, I think is important, and I think you're doing to find yourself in your story. And I mean, your story is so interesting because you get all these pieces. Maybe people have a more boring life, but
I don't believe that for a second. I think that's a temptation, right? To just sort of feel like I'm not going to tell another person's story. I have friends that feel the same, like you said, like it's just, well, all my family is this one ethnicity and I grew up in this blah, blah, blah. And I don't believe it for a second. I think everybody's got an interesting story that they can learn something from and that they can share. And I don't mean no disrespect to argue that point, but I don't believe it. I think everybody's got something to say and something to offer.
So what would you suggest for people that think their own story is like boring and they don't want to share?
Do some more digging. If you're human, there's skeletons in that closet. There is.
Next time we can have another talk about your skeleton. I see.
Right. There's a few.
So yeah, no, I mean, I'm learning a lot from my own story, but I'm kind of like the black sheep of my family. So every time I ask info to my cousin or family, everyone is like, same small village, same town since forever. And people don't really want to talk that much. So it's kind of hard for me to like figure out my past, but maybe I can do more digging. So if my mom doesn't want to chat, I can ask my aunties.
Yeah, and maybe an assistance would be something like 23andMe, where you could be like, "Whoa, where'd this come from? Who?" You know? So yeah.
I know I have some relatives in Argentina, but I have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
So at one point there was a huge immigration. I know a bunch of them went there. So maybe if they did 23andMe, I can connect with them.
It's possible.
So anyway, I think we are done for today. And I want to thank you so much for like share your story that is really unique. And as Charles said, no one story is really boring. So don't be afraid. Check your skeleton, open some boxes, being open to opportunity, because sometimes you might be surprised of yourself. We are gonna send you the email later about Charles and his contact. So if you wanna go to Alabama or you wanna learn more about him, just
if you want to go to Honduras, hit me up. I will be leading a trip down there too. So, and that's the one thing about travel's like walking with a story. So I think we learn so much about ourselves and our own prejudices and our own opinions and our own presumptions by traveling. That gets challenged. Anyway, I encourage travel as well. So, and you probably know that, Lisa, like here you are, so you've traveled.
I travel all over, so like this is like it's easy for me. To me, it's like okay. I mean, when we're going, it's driving me crazy. That is like 5 months. I'm not getting up like plane, but I've done some road trip. to balance that. But actually, this maybe can be the beginning of a different conversation. Maybe we plan a AG plus guest trip to Honduras.
I would love it. That would be awesome. You'd learn a lot. So it would inform your design practice, I tell you. It would. So
I would love that. So, guys, thank you so much for being here today. And gracias.
all right. De nada.